Hey everyone, welcome back to Critical Thinking in the Age of AI. I'm Shay. I'm a PhD candidate at Harvard, and I'm here to help you think more critically in this AI saturated world we're living in. This is just my repository of voice notes, so you don't have to worry about another 5 hour long podcast. And I'm working on rambling less and not letting my stream of consciousness get the best of me. But I actually realized something recently. I've been diving straight into these really complex debates about AI and epistemology, like really like heavy stuff. But I never actually laid the groundwork for what critical thinking is. And I don't want to assume that you guys have all watched my YouTube series by the same name, Critical Thinking in the Age of AI. So I wanted to just, focus on this foundational episode, because if we're going to be talking about, thinking critically, on a range of topics, I think we need to start with the basics. So, we're going to talk about beliefs, claims, arguments, and the mental traps that mess up even the smartest people. So think of this as your reference guide, the episode you come back to when you need to remember what good thinking actually looks like. And here's the thing. This isn't about making you sound smart at dinner parties. It's about giving you real tools to navigate a world where information is everywhere and clarity is rare. Okay, let's get into it. So, what is critical thinking? You've probably heard the term a million times, but let's get specific. Critical thinking isn't just being smart or knowing a lot of facts. You can actually have great memory, know tons of trivia, and still not be a critical thinker. Here's what it actually is. Critical thinking is about knowing how to work with information. It's the ability to take what you know, figure out what it means, spot the gaps, and draw reasonable conclusions. It's asking good questions. It's knowing when to trust something and when to dig deeper. The philosopher John Dewey, hello Dewey Decimal System, yeah, that guy, he basically coined the term back in 1910, and he referred to it as reflective thinking. So essentially, deliberately examining the grounds for your beliefs and testing whether those grounds actually hold up. So let's say your friend tells you, I heard that drinking celery juice every morning cures anxiety. A critical thinker doesn't just accept that or reject it based on whether it sounds right. They ask, where did that claim come from? What's the evidence? Does the reasoning make sense? Right? So that is critical thinking in action. And in our current moment, when AI can generate confident sounding answers to literally anything you ask, this skill isn't optional anymore. Honestly, I think it's essential. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning with beliefs. So, a belief is simply something you accept as true. It's your internal sense of how the world works. You believe the sun will rise tomorrow, right? You believe your friend is trustworthy. You believe that exercise is good for your health, hopefully, right? And some beliefs are based on direct experience, right? You've seen the sun rise every day of your life. And some are based on what you've learned from others. Maybe you've never personally studied exercise science, but you trust the experts who say it's healthy. And here's what matters. Beliefs aren't inherently good or bad. What matters is how you formed them and whether you're willing to update them when you encounter better information. The problem is we tend to hold on to our beliefs really tightly. They become part of our identity. And that's where things get tricky, because when information challenges our beliefs, it can feel like a personal attack, even when it's just information. Critical thinking requires you to hold your beliefs a little more loosely, to say, I believe this, but I could be wrong. Show me why. Okay. Now, let's get into claims. So a claim is when you take a belief and put it out into the world. It's when you say, this is true, and you're asking others to believe it too. Does that make sense? Okay. So claims are statements that something is true, false, good, bad, should happen, or shouldn't happen. They're assertions that take a position. Okay, so here are some examples of claims, just so we can, really make this real. For example, claim number 1, remote work makes people more productive. That is a claim. That's taking a position. Here's another example. Claim number 2, social media is harmful to teenagers. Is taking a position. Claim number 3, AI will replace most jobs within a decade. That is taking a position. Each of these is a claim. Someone is asserting that this is the case. And once you make a claim, you've opened the door to a really important question. Why should anyone believe you? That's where evidence and reasoning comes in. A claim without support is just an opinion floating in the air. But a claim backed by solid reasoning and evidence, right? That's the start of real critical thinking. But, before we even evaluate claims, we need to understand issues. What is an issue? An issue is a question or debate, the thing we're actually trying to figure out, right? Does that make sense? It's the open problem that people are wrestling with. And let me give you some examples, right? So here are some issues. Issue number 1. Should schools ban smartphones in classrooms? Issue number 2, is universal basic income a good policy? Okay. Issue number 3, how should we regulate AI? So you notice these are all questions, right? They don't have or they don't take a position. They just identify the thing we need to think through. Now here's where it connects, right? Claims, what we just talked about, claims, follow me, are answers to issues. So if the issue is, should school ban smartphones? Then someone might claim, yes, because they're distracting students and hurting learning outcomes. And somebody else might claim, no, because smartphones are essential tools for modern learning. These are just examples, right? So see, understanding the difference between an issue and a claim matters because a lot of online discourse skips straight to claims without even identifying the underlying issue, So people just start yelling their positions at each other without clarifying what question they're even trying to answer. And oftentimes, this is what I believe, oftentimes misunderstandings sometimes happen because an opposing claim is actually addressing an entirely different issue than the one that your claim is addressing. I see this happen all the time online, So when you're thinking critically, always ask, what's the actual issue here, right? What question are we trying to resolve? Once you know that, you can start evaluating the claims people are making. Okay, now let's talk about arguments. And no, I don't mean the kind you have with your partner about whose turn it is to do the dishes. Definitely your turn, right? In critical thinking, an argument is a claim backed up by reasons. That's it. Someone says something is true and they give you their reasoning for why you should believe them. Right? So every argument has 2 parts, the premise and the conclusion. Are you following? Every argument has two parts, the premise and the conclusion. Premises, these are your reasons, your evidence, your starting points. They're the because part of the argument, right? And then you have the conclusion, right? So this is the claim being made, the point the person is trying to prove. So let me give you a super simple example so we can really understand different parts of an argument. Here's an example. Quote, you should bring an umbrella today because it's going to rain. End quote. The conclusion is you should bring an umbrella. The premise is it's going to rain. Now, here's what matters. Good arguments have premises that actually support the conclusion, right? And bad arguments, they often have premises that don't hold up or they don't connect logically to the conclusion. That's why we broke it down. Premise, conclusion, premise, conclusion, premise, conclusion, right? Let's look at a messier real world example, right? So, quote, social media is making teenagers depressed. We know this because teen depression rates have gone up since social media became popular, end quote. Okay, so what's happening here? You have the premise. Teen depression rates have increased since social media became popular. Then you have the conclusion. Social media is causing teen depression. Now, is that premise true? Yeah, actually, depression rates have gone up. But does that premise prove the conclusion? Not necessarily, right? Correlation isn't causation, right? Maybe depression rates went up because of economic anxiety or changes in how we diagnose mental health or a dozen other factors, but this is what critical thinking looks like in practice. It's breaking down what someone's claiming, checking if the evidence is solid, and then asking if the evidence actually supports the conclusion they're drawing. Remember, correlation is not causation, right? Okay, so here's a concept that sounds abstract, but is actually super practical. Judgment. Let's talk about judgment. Okay, so judgment is the act of weighing everything you know, the evidence, the arguments, your own experience, and coming to a reasoned conclusion. It's not just having an opinion. I want to be clear about that. It's not just having an opinion. It's forming a position based on actual thinking. So, good judgment requires a few things. Number one, understanding what information actually means, right? Don't just skim, really grasp what's being said, right? Number two, breaking arguments down. What are the premises? What's the conclusion? Does it hold together, right? Number three, evaluating the quality of reasoning. Is this evidence solid? Is the logic sound? Or are there holes, right? And four, drawing appropriate conclusions, not jumping too far, not being too cautious, just following where the evidence actually leads, right? And here's the kicker. Judgment isn't purely logical. Hear me out, okay? Because we all bring our values, our experiences, our biases to every decision we make, right? And this is why we need to be aware of those biases, because honestly, they can hijack our thinking without us even realizing it. Okay, so now let's talk about confirmation bias, right? Confirmation bias is when you look for, notice, and remember information that supports what you already believe, and you therefore ignore or downplay anything that contradicts it. Right? Here's a real example. So let's say you believe electric cars are the future. When you're scrolling through your feed, you notice every article about how EVs are getting cheaper, how charging infrastructure is improving, how they're better for the environment. Those articles will stick with you. But articles about lithium mining concerns, right? Or power grid strain, or the limitations of battery technology, right? You might scroll past them. Or if you do read them, you're way more skeptical, right? Looking for reasons to dismiss them. That's confirmation bias. And here's what makes it so tricky. It's mostly actually unconscious, right? Your brain isn't trying to deceive you. It's just trying to be efficient. Confirming what you already think takes less mental energy, right, than reconsidering your entire worldview or position, right? And the problem is this bias gets weaponized quite a bit online, because algorithms feed you more of what you've already agreed with, right? AI chatbots give you answers that align with how you phrase the question. You end up in this like echo chamber where your beliefs get reinforced over and over and over, and you never encounter the stuff that might challenge them. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it? I say actively seek out good counter arguments, not a straw man, but the strongest case for the other side. Ask yourself, if I'm wrong about this, what would convince me? Right? And actually engage with sources that make you uncomfortable. Trust me, I live in a perpetual state of intellectual discomfort because I'm committed to becoming a better thinker each and every day. It's hard, it takes effort, but that's what critical thinking requires. Hear me out, okay? Now, let's talk about belief bias, which I think is a bit sneakier than confirmation bias. Belief bias is when you judge whether an argument is logically valid based on whether you find the conclusion believable rather than actually evaluating the logic, right? So here's an example of an argument. The argument goes like this, quote, all things with engines need oil. Cars need oil. Therefore, cars have engines. Super simple, but let's break it down. Most people read that and think, well, yeah, that makes sense. But logically, that argument is invalid. Just because cars need oil doesn't mean they have engines. They could need oil for some other reason, right? But you're accepting bad logic because the conclusion happens to be true, right? Now let's look at another argument because I really want to drive home this point. Here's the second argument. Quote, all things with screens are electronic. Calculators are electronic. Therefore, all calculators have screens. End quote. Same logical structure, and it's equally invalid. But this time, you probably caught it, right? Because the conclusion is obviously false, right? Not all calculators have screens. Shout out to those LCD display pocket calculators from back in the day. I don't know if students these days would even remember the LCD calculators. I mean, I don't know. But you see what happened essentially, right? You judged the logic differently based on whether the conclusion felt true. That is belief bias. And honestly, it happens all the time, right? When someone makes an argument for something you already believe, you're way more likely to accept weak reasoning, right? So when they argue against what you believe, suddenly you're a logic detective finding every flaw. And this is why I pointed out these two different kinds of biases, right? Because this can become especially dangerous with AI tools. When ChatGPT or Claude or any other, Gen AI tool that you use gives you an answer that aligns with your worldview, it may feel authoritative. And you're less likely to check the reasoning. But when it says something you disagree with, you immediately start questioning it. So how do we fix this? We slow down. No, seriously, I truly believe that's the answer. You slow down. You learn to ponder and not immediately respond, right? Because when you encounter an argument, especially one you instinctively agree with, force yourself to look at the structure of the reasoning, not just whether the conclusion sounds right. Okay? So, why does all of this matter, especially in the age of AI? Because AI is really good at generating arguments that sound convincing, right? It's trained on billions of examples of human reasoning, right? So it knows how to package claims in ways that feel authoritative but are intellectually hollow, right? But here's the thing. AI doesn't have judgment. It doesn't weigh evidence. It's pattern matching and prediction, not critical thinking. So when you ask an AI a question, you're getting something that looks like reasoning, right? Premises, conclusions, confident language, but you have to do the actual evaluation. You have to ask, are these premises true? Does a conclusion follow? Am I accepting this because it's logical or because it confirms what I already think? These building blocks we've talked about today, understanding beliefs, claims, and issues, right? Breaking down arguments into premises and conclusions. Being aware of confirmation bias and belief bias. These are your tools for not just navigating AI, but navigating any information landscape. Critical thinking isn't about being cynical or skeptical of everything, It's about being thoughtful. It's about knowing when to trust, when to question, and when to update your beliefs because you've encountered better reasoning. And that skill that I'm describing, right? It's never been more valuable than it is right now. All right, that's the foundation. I know we covered a lot, but these concepts are worth coming back to. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, subscribe to the show so you don't miss future episodes. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear which of these concepts resonated with you or what questions you still have about critical thinking. And if you want to go deeper, you can find more resources and join the conversation over at my newsletter linked in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in to my stream of consciousness with these voice notes, and just keep thinking critically.